The signal came at 0347 hours, cutting through the background noise of deep space like a knife. Lisa Martinez had been monitoring the communications array for 6 hours straight, her coffee gone cold hours ago. The night shift at Earth's deep space monitoring station was usually quiet, filled with routine maintenance checks and the steady hum of machinery. Then the alien voice broke through. Lisa sat up straight, her hands flying across the control panel. The translation software kicked in, converting the strange musical tones into words that made her blood run cold. "This is the Zelanti homeworld. We are under attack. Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. We have no weapons, no ships of war. The Corvan Empire has come to destroy us. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we are dying. Our children are dying. Please, someone help us." The message repeated 3 times before cutting to static. Lisa stared at her screen, her heart pounding. In her 5 years at the station, she had never received anything like this. Earth had been part of the galactic community for only 20 years, and most alien contact was formal, peaceful, boring even. This was different. This was real fear. Lisa hit the emergency button and called her supervisor. Within minutes, the U.S. message was racing up the chain of command, reaching the highest levels of Earth's military in less than an hour. Captain Jake Harrison was eating breakfast when his communicator buzzed. He read the message twice, then stood up so fast his chair fell over. The UES Defender was docked at Luna Station for routine repairs, but Jake knew those repairs could wait. 20 minutes later, Jake was on a shuttle racing toward his ship. The Defender was a destroyer, built for war rather than exploration. Her hull was thick, her weapons were powerful, and her crew knew how to fight. Jake had served in the border wars against the pirates of the Outer Rim. He knew what real combat looked like. The message played again on his personal communicator as the shuttle docked. The alien voice was desperate, broken. Jake had heard that kind of fear before, in the voices of colonists calling for help as pirates burned their homes. Admiral Kate Sullivan was already waiting when Jake reached the Defender's bridge. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. She had fought in Earth's last great war, back when humans still killed each other instead of protecting aliens they had never met. "You heard the message?" she asked. Jake nodded. "How bad is it?" "Bad. The Galactic Council is calling for a committee meeting. They want to discuss diplomatic solutions. They estimate it will take 3 weeks to reach a decision." Jake felt his jaw tighten. 3 weeks? The Zelanti don't have 3 weeks. Maybe not even 3 days. Sullivan's voice was flat, controlled. "The Corvan Empire doesn't negotiate, they conquer. We've seen their work before." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was already at their stations, running pre-flight checks without being told. They had heard the message too. They knew what needed to be done. "What are our orders, Admiral?" Sullivan smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "The Third Fleet is being assembled, 12 ships including the Defender. We leave for the Zelanti system in 4 hours. The Council won't like it," Jake said. "The Council can complain later. Right now people are dying, and we're the only ones who seem to care about that." Across the solar system, other ships were already moving. The UES Liberty, Admiral Sullivan's flagship, was a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to level a small moon. The UES Retribution was loading Marines, soldiers trained for the kind of brutal ship-to-ship fighting that most galactic species found unthinkable. Commander Ryan Brooks was strapping himself into his fighter when the call came through. He led Falcon Squadron, 24 of the best pilots in the Earth Defense Force. His fighters were small, fast, and deadly. Unlike the exploration craft used by most alien species, human fighters were built for one purpose: to kill enemy ships before they could hurt anything humans cared about. Ryan had grown up on Mars, in the dome cities that struggled against the Red Planet's hostile environment every single day. He understood that sometimes you had to fight just to survive. The SIPO Zelanti message reminded him of the emergency calls from mining stations when the atmospheric processors failed. The same desperate fear, the same knowledge that death was coming fast. Colonel Amy Rodriguez was reviewing tactical data when her Marines began boarding the transport ships. She had read everything available about the Corvan Empire, and none of it was good. They were a military dictatorship that expanded by conquering peaceful species. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. The problem was that most galactic species didn't know how to resist. They had evolved on gentle worlds, under stable suns, with plenty of resources and few natural predators. War was something they read about in history books. Humans were different. Earth had tried to kill them for millions of years. Ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, plagues, predators, and 1,000 other dangers had shaped human evolution. They had learned to fight back against impossible odds, to never give up, to protect their own no matter the cost. Now they were going to protect someone else's children. The Zelante message played one more time as the Third Fleet prepared to depart. Lisa Martinez listened to it again from her station, tears in her eyes. Somewhere across the galaxy, alien families were hiding in basements while their world burned above them. But help was coming. Help from the species that the Galactic Council called dangerously aggressive and unsuited for civilized space. Help from the Deathworlders who had turned their planet's hostility into strength. The Third Fleet jumped to hyperspace 6 hours after the first distress call. 12 human warships carrying 3,000 of the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever produced. They were coming to save people they had never met, on a world they had never seen, because someone had asked for help. That was what humans did. The Zelante system looked like hell when the human fleet arrived. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the tactical display with growing anger. 30 Corvan warships hung in orbit around the blue-green world. Below, their massive forms blocking out sections of the planet's surface. Bright flashes marked where orbital bombardment platforms were firing down at the cities. "Ma'am, we're picking up massive energy readings from the surface," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. "Multiple population centers are burning. The atmosphere shows heavy particulate matter from widespread destruction." Sullivan's hands tightened into fists. The Corvans were not just conquering the Zelante homeworld. They were destroying it piece by piece, slowly, deliberately. This was not war. This was genocide. "Communications, any response to our hails?" "Yes, ma'am. The Corvan Fleet Commander is requesting we identify ourselves and state our business." Sullivan almost smiled. Almost. "Tell him we're here to stop the slaughter. Tell him to withdraw immediately, or face the consequences." The response came back quickly. The Corvan commander's voice was deep and mocking through the translation system. "Unknown vessels, you are interfering in internal Corvan affairs. The Zelante world belongs to the Empire. Now withdraw or be destroyed. You are outnumbered 30 ships to 12. Captain Jake Harrison was listening from the Defender's bridge. He looked at his weapons officer. "Status on our missile systems?" "All tubes loaded and ready, sir. Target locks acquired on the nearest bombardment platform." Jake nodded. The Corvans thought this was about numbers. They were wrong. This was about what humans were willing to do when innocent people were dying below them. "Admiral Sullivan to all ships," came the voice over the fleet communications. "The Corvans have 30 seconds to cease fire on civilian targets. If they don't, we remove them. Rules of engagement are weapons free. Protect the civilians. Kill anything that threatens them." Commander Ryan Brooks was already in his fighter, floating in the launch bay of the UES Retribution. Around him, 23 other pilots ran through their final checks. Falcon Squadron had trained for this kind of mission hundreds of times, but never against aliens who were actively murdering civilians. "Falcon Squadron, this is Brooks. We're going after the bombardment platforms first. Those are our priority targets. Everything else comes second to stopping the orbital bombardment." "Copy that, Commander," came the voices of his pilots. They were young, most of them, but they had all grown up hearing stories about the border wars. They knew what pirates did to helpless colonists. The Corvans were just bigger pirates with better ships. The 30 seconds ended. The human fleet exploded into action. The UES Liberty fired first, her heavy guns targeting the largest Corvan battleship. The enemy vessel's shields flared and held, but the ship rocked under the impact. The Corvin commander had expected a warning shot. He got a full battle salvo instead. Jake Harrison brought the Defender in fast and low, using the planet's gravity, well, to build speed. His ship was smaller than the Corvin vessels, but she was built for exactly this kind of fight. Earth's shipyards had learned harsh lessons during the border wars about what happened when pirates got close to civilian targets. "Target the bombardment platform," Jake ordered. "Full missile spread. 6 missiles streaked away from the Defender, their warheads designed to punch through military-grade armor. The Corvin platform tried to shift its fire to the incoming human ship, but it was too late. The missiles struck home and the platform erupted in flame and debris. 1 down, 11 to go. Ryan Brooks led Falcon Squadron through the Corvin formation like a knife through paper. The alien ships were huge, powerful, built to intimidate and overwhelm through sheer size. But they were also slow and clumsy compared to human fighters. "Sarah, take your wing and hit that platform on the North Continent," Ryan ordered. "Danny, you're with me. We're going after the one over the capital city." The Corvin fighters launched to intercept, but they flew like they expected their enemies to run. Most galactic species did run when faced with superior numbers. Most galactic species had evolved on worlds where retreat was a viable option. Humans had evolved on Earth, where retreat usually meant death. Lieutenant Sarah Kim broke away from the main formation, leading 4 fighters in a diving attack on the bombardment platform. Corvin laser fire lit up the space around her fighter, but she flew through it like she was threading a needle. Her missiles found their target, and another platform died. On the UES Retribution, Colonel Amy Rodriguez was watching the battle unfold, while her Marines prepared for boarding actions. The Corvins were learning what human military doctrine really meant, but they hadn't learned the most important lesson yet. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to save people. "Colonel Admiral Sullivan is requesting boarding parties for any Corvin ships we disable," came the report from her communications officer. Amy smiled coldly. The Corvins had chosen to murder civilians. Now they were going to learn what humans did to people who hurt the innocent. "Tell the Admiral we're ready. Marines don't leave witnesses when someone kills kids." The battle was turning. The Corvin fleet had expected to face another peaceful species that would negotiate or retreat when faced with superior numbers. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to get more dangerous the longer the fight went on. Captain Danny Foster brought his destroyer through a gap in the Corvin formation, his guns targeting the command ship. The massive alien vessel turned to bring its main weapons to bear, but Danny's ship was already past, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The Zelanti world spun below them, its cities burning under the orbital bombardment. But fewer platforms were firing now. The humans were methodically destroying them one by one while fighting off the entire Corvin fleet at the same time. Admiral Sullivan watched the tactical display and felt something she hadn't felt in years: pride. Her ships were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, but they were winning. They were saving people who had never seen a human before, who didn't even know their names. "Ma'am, we're receiving transmissions from the surface," reported her communications officer. "The Zelanti are asking who we are." Sullivan thought about that for a moment while her guns destroyed another Corvin ship. "Tell them we're friends. Tell them help has arrived." The Corvin reinforcements arrived just as the last bombardment platform exploded in a ball of fire. Major Chris Taylor was leading his boarding team through the corridors of a disabled Corvin cruiser when the alert started screaming. 20 more enemy ships had just dropped out of hyperspace, twice the size of the original fleet. "Control, this is Taylor. We've got the ship's bridge secured, but it looks like the party just got bigger." Admiral Sullivan's voice crackled through his communicator. "Copy that, Major. How many prisoners?" Chris looked around the bridge at the dead Corvin soldiers. His Marines had moved through the ship like a storm, clearing each section with brutal efficiency. The aliens had fought hard, but they had never faced enemies like humans before. "No prisoners, ma'am. They kept fighting even after we offered surrender." There was a pause. "Understood. Get your people out of there. We need you back on the Retribution." Chris started moving his team toward the extraction point, but he could hear the confusion in the Corvin voices echoing through the ship's corridors. These aliens had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never fought anyone who could operate in vacuum without life support gear, who could survive in radiation that would kill most species, who treated zero gravity like a minor inconvenience. Doctor. Helen Carter was working frantically in the Liberty's communications center, trying to establish contact with the Zelanti survivors on the planet below. The alien language was unlike anything in Earth's databases, all musical tones and complex harmonics that seemed to carry emotional meaning as well as information. "Admiral, I'm getting through to someone down there," Helen called out. "It's a Zelanti civilian shelter. They're asking if we're really here to help." "Tell them yes," Sullivan replied without taking her eyes off the tactical display. "Tell them to stay in their shelters. This isn't over yet." The new Corvin fleet was massive. Their ships were the size of small cities, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's surface. But they were also slow, designed to intimidate rather than fight. Captain Danny Foster was already moving the moment the enemy ships appeared. His destroyer was damaged from the first battle, her hull scorched and her shields failing, but her weapons were still online. "Engineering, I need everything you've got," Danny called down to Chief Engineer Ben Miller. Ben's voice came back through. The ship's communication system calmed despite the chaos around them. "Sir, I can give you full power for maybe 10 minutes before the reactor overloads. After that, we're dead in space." 10 minutes it is. Danny brought his ship around in a tight arc that would have crushed the crew of any other species. Humans could survive acceleration that turned most aliens into paste. It was another gift from their death world, another advantage that the galaxy didn't understand. Commander Ryan Brooks was back in space with what remained of Falcon Squadron. Half his pilots were dead or disabled, but the survivors were angrier than ever. They had seen the bombardment platforms, seen what the Corvins did to helpless civilians. "All fighters, this is Brooks. We're going after their flagship. If we can take out their command ship, maybe the rest will retreat." Lieutenant Sarah Kim's voice came through the squadron frequency. "Commander, that thing is the size of a space station. Our missiles won't even scratch it." "Then we get creative," Ryan replied. "Remember what they taught us about fighting pirates? When you can't go through the armor, you go around it." The Corvin flagship was indeed massive, but like all ships, it had weak spots, docking bays, sensor arrays, communication dishes, places where armor was thinner, where a fighter could get close enough to do real damage. Colonel Amy Rodriguez was preparing her Marines for another boarding action when the ship shook under enemy fire. The Retribution was taking a beating from 3 Corvin cruisers, but she was still fighting back. "Ma'am, Admiral Sullivan is requesting volunteers for a special mission," reported her aide. Amy looked around at her Marines. They were battered, exhausted, but their eyes were still bright with determination. These were soldiers who had trained in the asteroid mines of the Belt, who had fought pirates in the vacuum of space, who had never learned the word surrender. "What kind of special mission?" "Infiltration of the Corvin flagship, intelligence gathering and sabotage." Amy smiled. It was the kind of smile that had terrified pirates from Mars to Jupiter. "Tell the Admiral we volunteer." The battle was becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. Most space conflicts were formal affairs, with rules and protocols, with chances for surrender and negotiation. This was different. This was humans fighting the way they had always fought, with desperate creativity and absolute determination. Dr. Nancy Brooks was monitoring the environmental systems of the human ships, watching as her people performed impossible feats in conditions that should have killed them. The UES Defender was fighting with half her atmosphere vented to space. The Retribution's crew was operating in radiation levels that would have been lethal to most species. But humans had evolved on a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. They were built to survive what would destroy others. The Zelanti were watching from their shelters, seeing their rescuers fight impossible odds without hesitation. These strange bipeds from across the galaxy were dying to save people they had never met, on a world they had never seen. Admiral Sullivan was coordinating the entire battle from the Liberty's bridge, her ship serving as both flagship and fortress. Enemy fire was getting through her shields now, but she showed no sign of backing down. "All ships, this is Sullivan. The Corvins think this is about numbers. They're wrong. This is about what we're willing to do when children are dying. Show them what humans fight like when someone hurts the innocent. The Third Fleet responded like a pack of wolves given permission to hunt. Every ship, every fighter, every Marine threw themselves at the enemy with renewed fury. The Corvins were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy called humans Deathworlders, and why that was both a warning and a promise. The Corvin flagship was a monster of metal and death, 3 times larger than any human ship. Its weapons could destroy planets, and its armor could stop anything the galaxy could throw at it. Captain Tony Walsh looked at it through the view screen of the UES Retribution and felt his blood turn cold. "Sir, we're getting a direct challenge from their fleet commander," reported his communications officer. "He wants to face us ship to ship." Tony almost laughed. The Corvin commander thought this was some kind of honor duel between warriors. He didn't understand what he was really facing. "Tell him we accept," Tony said. "Then get me Colonel Rodriguez." Amy. Rodriguez was already suited up for combat when the call came through. Her boarding team was ready, 40 of the most dangerous fighters humanity had ever produced. They had trained in the vacuum of space, in the crushing depths of Europa's oceans, in the radioactive wastes of Earth's old battlefields. "Colonel, we need that flagship disabled," Tony explained. "I can get you close, but you'll have to do the rest." Amy checked her weapon one more time. It was a simple plasma rifle, designed for fighting in space where most weapons failed. Humans had learned to keep their tools simple and deadly. "How close can you get us?" "Close enough to ram them if we have to. On the planet below, Colonel." Michelle Davis was coordinating the evacuation of the last Zelanti population centers. The orbital bombardment had stopped, but Corvin ground forces were still hunting survivors through the ruins of the cities. "This is Davis to all units. We have civilian transports incoming from the fleet. I need covering fire for the landing zones." Sergeant Peter Johnson was leading a squad of Marines through the wreckage of what had once been a Zelanti school. The aliens were tall, graceful beings with blue-green skin and large eyes that held too much sadness. They moved like dancers even when they were running for their lives. "Sarge, we've got Corvin troops moving in from the east," reported one of his Marines. "Looks like a full company." Peter looked at the Zelanti civilians they were protecting. Old ones, young ones, some so small they had to be carried. The Corvins were coming to finish what their ships had started. "Then we stop them here," Peter said simply. Back in space, the Retribution was closing on the Corvin flagship. The massive alien ship turned its weapons toward the approaching human vessel, confident that its superior size and firepower would end the fight quickly. The Corvins had never fought humans before. They didn't understand that size meant nothing when your enemy was willing to die to protect the innocent. "All stop," Tony ordered, when they were just a few hundred meters from the flagship's hull. "Colonel Rodriguez, you're cleared for boarding." Amy and her Marines launched from the airlocks without hesitation, crossing the vacuum between the ships in their armored suits. The Corvin hull loomed ahead of them like a metal cliff, bristling with weapons and sensors. But every ship had weak spots. Amy had studied the intelligence reports, memorized the layout of Corvin vessels. She knew exactly where to strike. "Charges set," reported her demolitions expert over the radio. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The explosion tore a hole in the flagship's side, and the Marines poured through into the alien corridors beyond. The Corvins waiting for them opened fire immediately, but their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not close-quarters fighting. Amy moved through the corridors like death itself, her Marines flowing around her in perfect formation. They had trained for this kind of mission in the asteroid belts, where one mistake meant floating in vacuum forever. The Corvin ship was luxury compared to that. On the planet's surface, Peter Johnson and his squad were holding their position against overwhelming odds. The Corvin ground troops outnumbered them 10 to 1, but they had made a critical mistake. They were fighting for conquest. The humans were fighting for survival. "Contact left," called out Private Lisa Green, her rifle, already tracking targets. Multiple hostiles advancing through the rubble. Peter triggered his weapon, watching Corvin soldiers fall under concentrated human fire. These aliens were good fighters, but they had never faced an enemy that treated impossible odds as just another day at the office. Davis, this is Johnson. We need those transports now. We can't hold this position much longer. Michelle Davis was watching the tactical display from her command post, coordinating evacuation efforts across the continent. Every minute they delayed meant more civilian deaths, but the transports needed time to land safely. 5 more minutes, Peter. Can you give me 5 more minutes? Peter looked around at his Marines. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running, low on ammunition. By any reasonable measure, they should retreat. But the Zelanti civilians behind them couldn't run fast enough to escape. We'll give you 10, Peter replied. In the flagship's engineering section, Amy Rodriguez and her team were moving toward their objective. The ship's power core was heavily defended, but the Corvins had made their corridors too wide, their ceilings too high. They were built for species that needed room to maneuver. Humans had learned to fight in cramped spaces, in narrow tunnels, in places where larger enemies couldn't bring their advantages to bear. Amy's Marines flowed through the ship like water, finding paths the Corvins had never considered. Core room ahead, reported her point man. Heavy defenses, but I think we can get through. Amy smiled inside her helmet. The Corvins had built their ship to withstand attacks from other fleets, other species that fought by the rules of civilized warfare. They hadn't built it to withstand humans. Set the charges, she ordered. If we can't capture this ship, we destroy it. The demolitions expert started placing his devices while the rest of the team held the corridor. Through the ship's hull, they could hear the sounds of the space battle continuing, human ships fighting against impossible odds to buy time for the evacuation below. Lieutenant Maria Santos was flying her fighter through the Corvin formation, her missiles exhausted and her guns running low on ammunition. Most of her squadron was gone, but she kept fighting because that was what humans did. They fought until they won, or until they died. Her fighter was damaged, her life support failing, but she had one more job to do. The Corvin flagship was still operational, still commanding the enemy fleet. If she could disable its communications array, maybe the human fleet could win this fight. Maria looked at her fuel gauge, at her damaged engines, at the massive enemy ship ahead of her. She thought about the Zelanti children hiding in the ruins below, about her own family back on Mars, about all the innocent people who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. This is Santos to all human ships, she said into her radio. Tell my mom I did my job. Then she pushed her throttle to maximum and aimed her fighter at the flagship's bridge. Maria Santos's fighter struck the Corvin flagship's bridge like a comet of fire and metal. The explosion lit up space for thousands of kilometers, and suddenly the massive alien ship went dark. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched from the Liberty's bridge as the enemy fleet began to fall apart. Without their flagship's coordination, the Corvin ships started firing on each other in the confusion. Some tried to retreat. Others kept fighting without purpose or plan. All ships, cease fire, Sullivan ordered. Let them run if they want to. Our job was to save the Zelanti, not destroy the Corvin Empire. Inside the dying flagship, Amy Rodriguez felt the ship shake as secondary explosions ripped through its hull. Her Marines had completed their mission, but now they were trapped in a ship that was coming apart around them. Colonel, we need to move, called out her demolitions expert. This whole section is going to collapse. Amy looked around at her team. They had lost 3 Marines in the fighting, but they had accomplished something impossible. They had crippled a ship 10 times larger than anything humanity had ever built. Emergency extraction, Amy ordered into her radio. All Marine units prepare for pickup. Captain Tony Walsh brought the Retribution alongside the flagship's hull, using his ship's tractor beams to pull the Marine boarding teams to safety. It was dangerous work, made more difficult by the debris and radiation pouring from the dying alien vessel. But humans had been rescuing each other from impossible situations since they first learned to use tools. They weren't going to stop now, oh no. The planet below, the last transport ships were lifting off from the evacuation zones. Colonel Michelle Davis watched them rise through the atmosphere, carrying thousands of Zelanti civilians to safety aboard the human fleet. Sergeant Peter Johnson and his squad had held their position for 37 minutes against odds that should have killed them all. When the transports finally arrived, only half his Marines were still fighting, but they had saved everyone they were sent to protect. Johnson, "This is Davis. Outstanding work down there. Get your people to the ships." Peter looked around at the ruins of the Zelanti city. Smoke was still rising from the bombardment sites and fires burned in the distance. But the civilians were safe. The children were safe. "Copy that, ma'am." Mission accomplished. Dr. Helen Carter was working around the clock to communicate with the Zelanti refugees aboard the human ships. The aliens were traumatized, confused, unable to understand why strangers from across the galaxy had risked everything to save them. "They keep asking why we came," Helen reported to Admiral Sullivan. "They want to know what we expect in return." Sullivan thought about that while she watched the medical teams treating wounded Marines and pilots. Her fleet had lost 30% of its strength and hundreds of her people were never going home. But they had saved an entire species from extinction. "Tell them we came because they asked for help," she said finally. "Tell them that's what friends do." 2 weeks later, the human fleet was still in orbit around the Zelanti homeworld. Captain Alex Turner was overseeing the construction of temporary space habitats for the displaced population, while Dr. Nancy Brooks worked with Zelanti scientists to develop ways to heal their damaged planet. The work was slow and difficult, but the humans stayed. They had committed to helping, and they would see it through to the end. The Galactic Council finally arrived on the 3rd week, a fleet of sleek, diplomatic vessels that looked like art pieces compared to the scarred human warships. They came to investigate the incident, to determine if humanity had violated interstellar law by intervening without authorization. Commander Steve Parker was waiting for them in the Liberty's conference room, a simple space with metal walls and no decoration. The alien diplomats seemed uncomfortable in the stark environment, but Steve had spent his career dealing with politicians who preferred talking to acting. "The Council is concerned about humanity's aggressive response," announced the lead diplomat, a tall being with crystalline skin and too many eyes. "Military intervention without diplomatic approval sets a dangerous precedent." Steve looked at the alien through tired eyes. He had been awake for most of the past 3 weeks, coordinating relief efforts and helping rebuild a world he had never seen before. "Dangerous for who?" he asked. "For the stability of galactic civilization. There are procedures, protocols that must be followed. Wars cannot be started by individual species acting alone." Steve stood up and walked to the view screen that showed the Zelanti world below. New cities were being built to replace the ones the Corvins had destroyed. Refugee camps were becoming permanent settlements. Life was returning to a world that had been marked for death. "This wasn't a war," Steve said quietly. "This was a rescue. People were dying and we stopped it. That's all." "But the implications..." "The implications are simple," Steve interrupted. "If someone calls for help, humans will answer. If children are dying, we will save them. If you have a problem with that, take it up with Earth's government. My job is done here." The diplomat stared at him, trying to understand this strange species that fought wars to save strangers and asked for nothing in return. Later that day, the human fleet prepared to depart. The Zelanti were safe. Their world was healing, and other species were already volunteering to help with the reconstruction efforts. The crisis was over. Admiral Sullivan stood on her bridge one last time, looking down at the planet they had saved. Her ships were damaged, her crews were exhausted, and the politicians back home would spend months arguing about what they had done. But the children were alive. That was all that mattered. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command," reported her communications officer. "They're asking for a full report on our actions." Sullivan smiled. "Tell them we responded to a distress call and completed the mission. Tell them we're coming home." As the Third Fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Zelanti system behind, word was already spreading through the galaxy. When other species debated and diplomats talked, when committees met and protocols were followed, there were Deathworlders who would answer the call. The message was simple and clear. Humans fought for anyone who needed protection, even if they had never met before. That was what made them different. That was what made them dangerous. And that was what made them friends worth having.